Hello YouTube chess lovers and my friends, this is Gunjan here. Welcome to my 14th episode of Dirty Chess Tricks Against Sicilian. In this episode, I am going to show you one of the surprising line against Classical Sicilian from the white perspective. The opening arises after the following order: e4, c5, knight to f3, d6, d4, c captures d4, knight captures d4, knight to f6, attacking e4, knight to c3, defending, and now the characteristic classical Sicilian move, knight to c6. Now, as per the database, bishop to g5 and bishop to c4 are one of the most popular choice by white, and no wonder your opponent is going to prepare for that. However, few classical Sicilian players are ready to meet this move, namely knight to d5. Well, this line not only contains a lot of tricks, but the good point is, so far there are only 28 FIDE games played with this variation, where I think black has to play very carefully, otherwise he can be literally outplayed at the opening stage. As I have shown over here, black has 4 choices, and amongst them e6 is one of the most popular choice. However, let's start with other replies and see how dangerous it can be for the black. The first move I want to consider is very obvious: knight captures e4, grabbing the free pawn. But in fact, it turns out that this is a big time disaster, as we have first trick on the table. Can you guess white's next reply? Yup, it's very obvious: knight to b5, and c7 square is under fire in the opening stage, and unfortunately for black, he can't do anything about it. The second move I want to consider is knight captures d4, which is again a big positional blunder. The reason is, after knight captures f6 check, it doesn't matter however black recaptures. The most obvious choice is g captures f6. Afterwards, we can simply play queen captures d4. And in many Sicilian lines, white has to sacrifice the dark square bishop in order to achieve this kind of double pawn structure. But in this case, not only white can preserve his bishop pair, but the double pawn structure can become a big headache later on in the endgame. So once again, this is one of the great positions for the white camp. The third and the critical move I want to consider is knight captures d5, which is in fact liked by engine. However, as we will see, by going into the depth, white obtain a very good position in this variation. The point behind knight captures d5 is, after e captures d5, if black knight takes our knight or moves somewhere else, then e7 spot is a great target for the white camp. But that's not the whole point. The big idea is, black wants to deliver this check, which in fact wins the pawn. And it seems like white doesn't have any compensation for it. But after white's next reply, knight to b5, it is now black who has to be very careful to not to go in a worse position just for a miserly pawn. Okay, if black moves the king, then obviously white has a great deal of compensation. So the accurate response goes as follows: queen to e6 check, bishop to e2, and now queen to d7, which covers the vital c7 square. Well, that's a good side. The downside is black's light square bishop become extremely bad, and it will take a hell lot of time for black to take that queenside pieces out. Here my recommendation is white should start with c4, controlling the d5 square, and after a6 and knight to c3. Even though white is a pawn down, he has a healthy piece development, and on top there are some nasty tricks looming in there. There are few games in the database continue with g6, which I think already a big time blunder. Yup, you heard it right. It's a big mistake by black. The reason is, after knight to d5, white is looking for the fork on b6, which in fact gives black a completely losing position. If rook to b8, then bishop to c3 is a very strong reply. So the most natural response is queen to d8, covering the b6 square. But now comes bishop to e3, and unfortunately there is no defense on bishop to b6. One of the game in the database continues with e6, attacking the knight. But first black has to deal with this bishop to b6 threat by white, and after queen to g5, knight to c7, it is very obvious that black is going to lose a piece after knight captures a8, as queen captures g2 doesn't have any threat, because white can simply parry this with bishop to f3 and clearly emerge with an extra rook. The second move, e6, looks more obvious response from a classical Sicilian, as it stopped the knight to d5 idea by white. However, in this case, white can simply target the weak d6 pawn, starting with castle on the king side. After bishop to e7, bishop to f4, and castle on the king side, white can simply double up on the d file with queen to d2, and followed off with rook to d1. And as you can see, with this pressure, sooner or later, not only white will get the d6 pawn, but in fact his pieces will remain very active, especially if we compared the light square bishops. I have attached a model game in the PGN where white crushed black within 35 moves. So kindly check it out. Finally, let's check out what is going on after the move e6, which is a natural response in such a scenario. And against this, my recommendation is you should start with knight captures f6 check. Well, obviously if g captures f6, then black pawn structure will be ruined down and his king will become more unsafe. So naturally black has to capture with the queen. Afterwards, our same thematic operation starting with knight to b5. Attacking two spots, so black response is force. Black has to play queen to d8. And now more pressure on d6 with bishop to f4. Once again, black has two choices. Engine suggests that black should play here knight to e5. However, I don't like this. The simple reason is, here white has too many good choices. For example, one aggressive line can run like this: queen to d4, attacking the knight. And the point is, after the move a6, white even doesn't need to move the knight, and he can castle on the queen side, as after pawn captures and bishop takes, d6 and b5 pawn both are under fire, and this position are quite superior for the white camp. So obviously, even though engine suggests knight to e5, it is a worse choice for the black. So accordingly, most popular choice is to play e5, but after this, we can simply drop our bishop back to e3, and now once again black has to play a precise move a6, because if he continue with other moves such as bishop to e6 or bishop to e7, then after c4, white will create a bind on the d5 square, and that means d6 pawn will become a weak isolated target in the black camp. Okay, a6, what else? Knight to c3, and now black has two choices. The first, bishop to e7, is a kind of inaccurate as it doesn't contest the d5 square, and we know from the past example that after knight to d5, b6 and c7 are the juicy hole in the black camp. One of the game in the database continues with castle on the king side, but after bishop to b6, queen to d7, the only thing you have to remember is you can play this in any order. Let's say in this game white plays c3 first, and after the move bishop to d8, planning to get rid of the d5 knight with knight to e7, white can continue with bishop to c4. Well, black execute his plan with knight to e7, and I think this is one of the model game which highlight how dangerous this position is for the black, as after queen to b3, black thinks that he can exchange some piece and wriggle out in the endgame, so he continue with knight captures d5, bishop captures d5, bishop captures b6, queen captures b6, and now queen to e7, finally liberating the light square bishop. But it's too little too late, as after castle on the king side, still that bishop cannot move as b7 pawn hangs. In the game, black continue with rook to b8. White response is very obvious, rook to d1, still stopping bishop to e6 idea as d6 pawn hangs. So black has to defend one more time with rook to d8, which finally saves all the weak point. But after white's next reply, black can see his death knell as white simply double up on the d file, and even though bishop to e6 happened on the board after rook to d1, that d6 pawn is doomed to the death, and in fact this endgame is completely winning for the white camp. So accordingly, bishop to e6 is a logical response, covering the d5 square. But no issues, we are still going to go ahead with our plan, namely knight to d5. Once again, black has three choices. Amongst them, bishop to e7 is a worst reply because white can simply continue with bishop to b6 and by force getting the rook in the corner. So obviously black is not going to allow this, so bishop captures d5 looks the obvious response. But even after this, we can calmly take this with queen, and after bishop to e7, bishop to c4, castle on the king side, and the move c3, sooner or later we are going to pressurize the d6 pawn, and black can hardly get an active position from this. Last but not least, probably the most critical response here is queen to a5 check. Afterwards, we will continue with c3. Black's idea is now he wants to capture this knight, as if you capture with the queen, then both the queen will disappear, and at the end, the d6 pawn hide behind the d5 pawn. So obviously, we are not going to capture back with the queen, but instead of that, my recommendation is you should continue with pawn captures d5, and it doesn't matter wherever this knight moves. The next move is queen to b3. Knight to b8 is covered in the PGN, but the most logical response here is knight to e7, trying to put that knight actively on the king side. But not to worry, as queen to b3 first of all create a threat on the b7 square. Well, queen to c7 and rb8 is covered in the PGN. So let's see most natural responses by black. First of all, what happens after queen captures d5? Well, very simple. We are going to play bishop to c4, and after queen to c6, bishop captures f7 and the move king to d8. Yup, the material is balanced, but black king is clearly misplaced, and that gives a great advantage to the white camp. Well, probably the most natural response here is to play b5, grabbing space on the queen side. But I think this is an inaccuracy by black, and white can simply exploit this with the move a4. So at the right time, once the rook supported, we are looking at a captures b5, and I like to show you one of my model game against a FIDE master where black continue with knight to f5, attacking on e3. I respond with bishop to d2, and now it doesn't matter whether black continue with bishop to e7 or g6, both lead to losing position to the black camp. For example, in the game black played bishop to e7, I responded with bishop to c4, attacking the knight, knight to h4, looking at g2, which I simply defended with castle on the king side. And now you see the dark side of playing the move b5, as white is simply threatening the move a captures b5, which is in fact not easy to stop. In the game my opponent played b captures a4, but after queen takes, and the move rook takes queen, the a6 pawn is doomed to the death, and after that, with accurate play and a one pawn advantage, white can easily convert it the full point. That's it guys, I hope you enjoy and like this small surprising line against Classical Sicilian, which you definitely want to consider in the tournament practice. With some careful research, you can use this as a great surprise weapon and gain a lot of points for an unprepared Classical Sicilian player. Thank you for watching this video. Feel free to like, subscribe and comment, and I'll meet you in my next episode very soon. Bye and take care.